There are some smart people on the left side of politics still, though, who are able to debate sensibly. One such person is this follower of mine on Twitter called Mike Lamb, who writes, "As someone who is nominally on the left, the nuclear issue is the biggest reason why I don't trust the Greens on the environmental issue. Australia has some of the least risks in having a nuclear plant. If Ukraine can still operate 15 reactors currently, surely we can too." Well said, Mike. In fact, lots of countries have nuclear power and use it safely and effectively. So let's take Simon Holmes-A-Court's advice and look at Germany, shall we? Germany's own national broadcaster, Deutsche Welle, explores the question, did Germany make a mistake last year in shutting down its remaining nuclear plants?
The 15th of April 2023 marks the end of the over 60-year-old era of nuclear power in Germany. While the world is still reeling from an energy crisis, Germany decided to take its 3 remaining nuclear power plants off the grid and get out of nuclear energy for good.
And how's that one working out for you guys?
Have a look at this chart. This is how much renewable electricity was generated on a day in April 2022. First, you have the constant energy coming from hydropower, then biomass, offshore wind, onshore wind, and the big player on this day, solar. In 2022, on average, almost half of the electricity generated in Germany came from renewables. And the government wants to ramp that up to 80% by 2030. But what about the other 20%? And what do we do when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow?
Yes, what do we do when the sun doesn't shine, Deutsche Welle? What do we do?
The amount of electricity needed to compensate for that is called the residual load, and it fluctuates a lot during the day. To fill the gap, we would either need huge batteries to store the energy in peak times, which we are still far from having on a large enough scale, or we need power plants that we can shut on and off very flexibly. Right now, a lot of this flexible adjusting in Germany is done by gas plants, which can be turned on and off completely within just 30 minutes. But they, of course, also emit considerable emissions.
It takes about a day or two to start up and shut down a nuclear plant, so we'd still need gas for that flexibility that the system requires. But lots of people you might not expect see nuclear as a necessary part of the energy mix.
The International Energy Agency sees nuclear power as necessary to lower our emissions as fast as possible. And the IPCC also factors in a growth in nuclear power in most of its 1.5-degree scenarios. Large-scale nuclear power is likely not a long-term solution for Germany. When, or rather if, Germany ramped up renewables to 100%, and if energy could be stored efficiently, and if we had a perfect electricity grid, there would be no need for nuclear power in Germany. But that's just not the reality yet. And even environmentalists who are traditionally anti-nuclear criticize Germany's exit.
I feel that it's a mistake to close them down in order to focus on coal.
Wow, even her. So that's Germany. They have plants built already, you say, and they're thinking of ramping them back up. That's different to starting a brand new nuclear industry, as is being proposed by the Liberals for Australia? Well, yes, but nuclear power exists all over the world. And many countries are building new power plants.
Many other powerhouse nations are building new nuclear power plants, even Japan.
Another milestone in the commercialization of China's homegrown nuclear technology.
President Emmanuel Macron announced a plan to build up to 14 new nuclear power plants.
Nuclear power is the only carbon-free energy source we have that can deliver large amounts of power day and night.
Wow. Even him. But let's look in a little more detail. Here's a chart from Statista based on data from the World Nuclear Industry Status Report 2022. At the top is the USA with 92 nuclear reactors. France coming in second there with 56. Then China at 55, storming into third place, having added 44 nuclear reactors since 2011. Canada, India, the UK, Japan, Russia and South Korea all make the top 10. Such tin pot nations. Right now we've got Ben Beattie in the studio. Ben is the other side's energy guru, electrical engineer and creator and host of the Baseload podcast, which is truly based. Ben, welcome back to the show. Great to have you here to make sense of all this for us.
Thanks, Damien.
First question, obvious question: can Australia do it? I mean, in 10 years, do you really think we could get nuclear up and running by then in some capacity?
If we're optimistic, you'd have to say yes, of course. Australia is an advanced economy. We have a democracy. We have a bureaucracy. When we put it to good use, it can do good things.
We're a massive bureaucracy.
Yeah, we could maybe add a little bit to it for a nuclear department, maybe. There might be some complaining about that. But I think, no, Australia could definitely build a big industrial facility in a decade. There's pieces around the regulations, there's pieces around the supply chain. But if you want to do it, you can do it. I mean, it's going to take a lot longer to build Snowy 2.
Right, okay. So compared to renewables, which I think we really should start calling unreliables, or land destroyers, land consumer technology, because it really does scar the environment. Wind and solar. It's nothing nice and pleasant about it environmentally, but compared to wind and solar, do you think nuclear? I mean, the coalition are talking about putting nuclear reactors at where present coal plants are, right? So if they did that, that would have much less environmental damaging impact.
Yeah, of course. If you build highly dense energy sources, you don't need the widely distributed and low density energy sources, and this is the great fear of the renewables industry. If the renewables industry has to compete with investment and market share and even, dare we say, government subsidies with a nuclear industry, and if they're both meant to give us zero emissions, but one's going to be there for 80 years per site, whereas renewables are going to be there for 20 years per site and then soak up some more land, you'd have to say that people will tend to go with the nuclear, and that's an obvious response. And the sooner we get to these more adult conversations, the better.
Yeah. So, is it feasible to put them in the coal plants where the coal plants are?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So the existing coal facilities in Australia, the ones that are left, there's 3 in Victoria, 4 in New South Wales, and 8 in Queensland, and that's all we're talking about. They already come with obviously an electricity connection, high capacity electricity connection. A lot of them have rail of some sort. They've obviously got heavy duty roads because you can't build a large baseload power station without roads. And if you're trying to get something big into an area to build it, something heavy that takes several trucks worth to get in, like transformers, turbines, and that sort of thing, you need the right route. So bridges have to be reinforced to do this. So these power stations have all that infrastructure already in place.
Transmission lines.
The transmission lines are critical.
That's the big one, right?
Well, we're going to be talking about transmission lines in this segment, but the existing transmission lines should be used as much as possible to get the most value out of them. And the only way you can do that is to reuse them. What we're talking about with the renewables, putting the distributed, these small capacity, to be honest, power stations out in the wilderness, the natural wilderness, and building new transmission lines, everything's going to be underutilised and cost a lot more, to be honest, and upset a lot of farmers too.
Okay, it doesn't seem to make sense, but Chris Bowen, the climate energy minister, whatever he's called, he's got pretty firm plans and a pretty firm commitment to the wind and solar land consuming technology. You saw him on the Insiders, on the ABC's Insiders this week. Let's have a quick look at a clip from that interview where Chris Bowen was basically asked about the opposition's claim that these nuclear plants could be built within 10 years.
You might have just heard the opposition says experts are telling them you could have a nuclear power plant up and running within 10 years in Australia. Is that right?
Tell him he's dreaming. I mean, I don't know what experts he's talking to. I mean, I just heard you talking about Europe's experience. I could point to the United States' experience. The United States, with a very developed regulatory regime, with a very developed nuclear industry, the nuclear leader of the world. The average build time of a nuclear power plant in the United States has been 19 years. Ted O'Brien thinks you can do it in Australia from 10 with a standing start, with no regulations, with it banned not only nationally but in the 3 most popular states. I mean, throw in the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge and you might sell him something.
He's a comedian. 19 years, is that reasonable?
Well, Mr. Bowen's pointing to projects which have been built in America since basically not long after World War II.
Okay, so the average is 19 years over all that time.
And you'd like to think that in this day and age where we have 3D modelling, computer-aided design, we have advanced materials, and we have proper manufacturing and unions even who would get on board, hopefully, you'd think that we could improve that a lot.
Yeah. Okay, so the idea that it would be 19 years is pushing it a little bit. I mean,
yeah, Mr. Bowen often complains about his opposition and the media and commentators cherry picking, but that's exactly what he's doing here.
All right, let's take a look at another clip from that interview when Spears asks about the nuclear ban, and he basically says to Bowen, you know, if the ban is if the cost of building these things is so prohibitive and so expensive, then why do you even need to have a ban?
If the idea of nuclear energy is so prohibitively expensive, takes too long, why do we need the ban at all?
Well, David, I hear this argument about, I'll just lift the ban and let the market sort it out. Well, the market hasn't sorted it out in any other country in the world. Every country in the world with nuclear has required massive transfers of taxpayer wealth to the nuclear constructors. Now, if we were to go down that road in Australia, we'd really be sending the signal that we're prepared to do that we are prepared to use taxpayers' money to subsidise the development of the nuclear industry. And we're not.
Just in fairness, though, Minister, you do. I mean, the government's building Snowy 2.0. You have the scheme, the capacity investment scheme that subsidises renewables. We don't know how much that's costing.
Well, very different approaches. I mean, you look at now the opposition has scrapped their small modular reactor policy after we've been telling them for 2 years there is no such thing as a small modular reactor. They've scrapped it and gone for large. The poster child of large nuclear reactors is Hinkley C in the United Kingdom, which is very, very late and has come in at $86 billion for a just over 3 gigawatt nuclear power plant. Now, coal in Australia is about 22 gigawatts. Do the maths. I mean, this is eye-watering amounts of government taxpayer subsidy that would be required to make this stack up. Maybe Peter Dutton's prepared to do that. We're not.
Okay, that's Chris Bowen, the Energy Minister, speaking on ABC Insiders this week. Ben, he made a couple of points there. I just want to go through them and get your responses to them one at a time. The first one was that the free market hasn't sorted it out. That, in fact, where nuclear is happening, it has required massive subsidies. Is that the case? What's your response to that?
I think he's made a reasonable point, but what he's done is he's taken it out of context. If he was going to be fair, he would also say that the renewable sector only exists because of subsidies. And I would say to Mr. Bowen, let's open the field to all the technologies. I mean, if we can't have an adult conversation about getting rid of subsidies and incentives and targets altogether, well, at least let's let nuclear compete for the same subsidies that renewables currently do.
Well, let's talk about subsidies for a minute, because renewables energy has enormous subsidies, the renewables industry. Would the subsidies for nuclear, and again, this might not be something you can answer, but I mean, is it likely that the subsidy required for nuclear would be more than is required for wind and solar?
I think if we did it badly, yes, it would. But I think we need to, like I said, coming back to a theme tonight of having adult conversations about this stuff. So we're talking about first of a kind in Australia, but not so much first of a kind in the world. Something else Mr. Bowen said was that Hinkley C is the poster child of the nuclear industry. Well, it's not actually. The power stations built in United Arab Emirates, the most recent one coming online a couple of weeks ago. Now, they've built 4.
This is a large nuclear reactor?
Yep. They've built 4 of them in the last 15 years. So I don't see why, if they can't do it, we can't do it. Now, the subsidy question is always going to be raised. I think that nuclear in Australia will need some subsidies, but I think the benefits of nuclear power will pay back those subsidies many times over. So if we're talking about getting very cheap electricity for 80 years per site, that's something to consider. And there's always a place for subsidies. Bringing new technology into the market is one of those places. The place where subsidies shouldn't be used is to disadvantage existing technologies to the extent where it becomes unprofitable and costs the economy a lot of money and costs people a lot of money.
Right. So you could effectively have an open market with fair, equitable subsidies offered, right? And then let them compete and see which technology is the best. But investors will work that out. I mean, they're not going to sink the money into projects that aren't going to work. So the point is that if he just lifts the ban, then we might get some people knocking on the door saying, hey, let's do a nuclear project in Australia. They'll do the sums, they'll do the research, they'll do the due diligence, they'll work out whether they think they can make it profitable. And then they'll come to the government and say, okay, we would require this level of subsidy. And then you can make it you can make an adult, as you say, an adult decision.
Well, Damien, this would be
this
would be the conversation to have to get rid of the ban and say, well, let's do it. But like I said before, I think the renewables industry is frightened of that conversation because it means that they will tend to disappear out of the system over time.
So as Will Shackle says, this is getting very political, right? It's really just about politics. And I would dare to say that perhaps there's a little bit of protectionism going on of certain technologies over others, so wind and solar over nuclear.
Well, definitely. When the government makes a target for a particular sector, they're making promises. And if Mr. Bowen's fond of his euphemisms, I'd say, well, let's stop making promises that you can't cash.
Yeah. Okay. So the second part of that was he said the opposition scrapped its small modular nuclear reactor policy. There's no such thing. We've been telling them there's no such thing as a small modular nuclear reactor for ages, and they finally accepted it and gone for large nuclear reactor technology. Okay, but before we just accept that, is it a dream? Is it a pipe dream? Is it nonsense to talk about small modular nuclear reactors, this new technology with the easier to build, faster to build?
No, SMRs are coming. Canada's looks like they're going to be the first ones. It's not going to happen overnight, but everyone can understand the logic of modularized technology, like cars, for example.
Of course, makes it faster and quicker and easier to build.
The quality gets better, the tolerances get tighter, everything works better, and obviously the costs come down when you can mass produce something or effectively mass produce something. Now, I'd take issue with Mr. Bowen saying that the LNP's policy was SMRs. I think their policy was pretty much just to repeal the existing bans as far as they can, because they've got the federal government and then you've got all the states to deal with as well. I think SMRs became a sort of a catchphrase and was cherry-picked a little bit.
Okay.
I would dare to say that it was smart for the coalition to raise SMRs as the bright new thing in nuclear, because that's I think we were talking in the car up here and we've said that the conversation has changed, the needle has turned a bit, and I think when you and Will's quite good on this, Will Shackle, about the polls and the public interest. He's all across that data, and it's really interesting to see how that needle is turning. And if the LNP or Ted and Peter and co used the allure of SMRs to turn that needle, I think that's perfectly valid.
Well, let's talk about the public's main concern about nuclear, which is, it's a bit scary. There's the fear of a nuclear event and the implications of that. Obviously, when you talk about a smaller reactor, people think, well, that's not going to be as dangerous if anything goes wrong. But they're all pretty safe. The technology is actually pretty safe now. You were mentioning Fukushima.
Yeah, well, if you look at what's happened around the world and you said, okay, everyone, it's pretty much common knowledge or household language, Chernobyl, Fukushima, and even maybe 3 Mile Island. But if you try and dig a bit deeper and find out, are there any more nuclear accidents around, you start coming up dry. So the next stage is to go, well, how many people have died from nuclear accidents and what's the effect been? And what can be done about that? Well, Chernobyl was a long time ago and there's a lot of reasons behind that. There was a Netflix series or a TV show recently which dramatised it quite a lot. But the people who I talked to about that basically snorted at it in derision and said that was very dramatised and hyped, that when you've got an old technology in, say, the old Soviet Union and all the problems that come with communism and the chain of command.
Oh, like the fact that you don't tell your boss when something's breaking because you don't want to get into trouble.
just cover over it and paper over it. Yeah,
and one of the best things about socialism and communism.
Hopefully the shift will change before the bad things happen.
Yeah.
So all that stuff there, and then and people are now going on tours there now. Okay, so that Chernobyl's a bad one. Fukushima, a nuclear accident in some sense caused by an earthquake tidal wave. But from my understanding, Fukushima, the power station itself, was one of the oldest and was planning to be shut down not long afterwards anyway. And the fact that no one actually died of the radiation from that event.
They had to vacate a number of towns, but it wasn't. There wasn't
a lot of it was just in case, not because of everyone's dropping dead with radiation poisoning.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot made of that by the media and by the anti-nuclear lobby, of which there's quite a lot of them around. But in terms of reality and practicality, nuclear is very safe.
Okay. Want to talk to you about that Hinkley C reactor that he was mentioning in the UK that you raised. He said it came in very late. It cost $86 billion. It provided 3 gigawatts of power. We have to replace in Australia baseload coal power of about 22 gigawatts, so we would need 7 or 8 Hinkleys. Is that right? So, well, if you do 7 or 8 times 86 billion, it's small change the way the Australian government spends money these days. But it is getting up towards the trillion mark. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
We wouldn't build a Hinkley size reactor in Australia. One of the difficulties of being a small grid, we are, in terms of economy, in terms of electricity, energy consumed, we're a very small player in the world. When you're talking about a massively interconnected region like UK and Europe, you can afford to build big, large 1,000 megawatt units and multi-1,000 megawatt units because you've got the demand there to meet it. And your 1,000 megawatt generator.
That's a gigawatt, right?
It is a gigawatt. Yep. You've got the units right. Well done.
Good.
Not bad for a Bachelor of Arts, Damien. But when you're talking about the size of individual units on the grid, too big becomes a problem. So the biggest we have in Australia is in Cogan Creek in Queensland. That's 750. And if you think about what the market operator who runs the grid from moment to moment, they consider the risk of that falling over and tripping off. So there has to be enough sitting around to make up the difference if it goes away. And that's a spinning reserve, not available in wind and solar, by the way. There's no spinning reserve in wind and solar. You can't turn it up if you need it all of a sudden. But too big a unit can add cost. So we're looking at smaller units, and there are smaller units around 400, 600 megawatts, which work well for us. And obviously they're cheaper to build, smaller to build, take less time.
Now, you would argue we still need some coal, right? Because we've got to have that baseload reliability that you can turn on and off quickly, because you can't turn nuclear on and off quickly either.
You can't turn
wind and solar, right?
You can't turn coal on and off quickly either. You can turn it down a bit, and you'll find that coal has a minimum to do with the air-fuel ratios and how much fuel you can blow in with the air. So there's some technical reasons around that.
Follow it? He's lost me. Yeah, go on.
We'll get the whiteboard out later.
Just can you turn it up or down?
It'll be fine. within limits you can. And it does quite a good job, as it's done in Australia for 50 years or longer. And people who say that coal's slow to ramp, well, yes, it is on the extremities, but to deal with the daily fluctuations, it's perfectly fine to do that. It can do that all day, all night, and that's reasonable. What it can't do is turn off in the middle of the day because there's nowhere to put the electricity because of all the rooftop solar panels that have been forced into the market.
Oh, right. Okay.
You can't over-generate the electricity because you've got nowhere to put it.
Over-generation.
The physics doesn't allow it. The economics doesn't like it, but you can subsidise the economics out of the way, but the physics, and you can't subsidise the physics out of the way.
No. The left can get rid of economics, but they can't get rid of physics. It really annoys them. They would if they could, I'm sure. Ben, for all the technical stuff, people can listen to you on the Baseload podcast and go and dive a bit deeper if your megawatts and gigawatts are up to a bit higher standard than mine and your understanding's a bit higher standard than mine. Tell people how to find the Baseload
podcast.
That's the one.
That is. So I chose Baseload because I figured that would describe my niche accurately.
Yeah.
So the Baseload podcast on all your iTunes, Spotify, etc. Thank you.
All right. Ben Beattie, thanks very much for joining us once again, our energy guru here on The Other Side. If you like that content, there's a lot more where that came from on The Other Side, a weekly show we put together, a summary of all the news of the week to get you smart for the weekend without the woke. Join us, smash that subscribe button and support us, and the little bell, and you can watch a full long episode here or subscribe here.